Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this week's edition of the Sunday Shot. We are thrilled that you are sharing your Sunday morning with me, Joe Dyer, your co host, alongside, as ever, the editor of the Shot, Dave Milner. Morning,
JJ,
Dave.
morning.
Look, it's been a week. It's been the first week of the 48th Parliament here in Australia, but also lots going on the international stage. And we are delighted to be joined to dive into this and tear it all apart by friends of the show, Ben Eltham.
Hey
There's
guys,
Ben.
how you going?
Hey,
Hey,
Ben.
Ben.
Welcome
Hello.
back.
Thanks
And
for having me.
Cheryl Kernot is also joining us again.
Morning,
Welcome back,
everyone.
Cheryl. We're delighted to have you
Thank
both
you.
back with us this morning. Um, Parliament returned, so there's going to be quite a bit to talk about there. But before we get into domestic politics, there's two big international stories. The first, of course, is the ongoing carnage in Gaza, and we saw the breakdown of talks, ceasefire talks in Qatar, that have been facilitated by the US with Hamas and Israel. Um, that's all collapsed again. So there's really no diplomatic trajectory at the moment that would see an end to the horror. There does seem to be at least a modest escalation of pressure being put on Israel after the truly shocking images that we've seen coming out of the territories of starving people, children, women, men, just looking like they're in Ethiopia in the 1980s. I mean, really, the sights of which we haven't seen as a man made tragedy on this scale. Ben, really, at least there seems to be some pushback now happening, even if for most of the world there isn't firm action attached to the ongoing statements of despair and dismay.
Well, it seems like the genocide is entering its most dismal and somber phase. Really, um, the the scenes out of Gaza are truly shocking, but they obviously tell us something that's been going on for some time now. People don't starve in an instant. This is the result of long-term action by the Israeli state to implement these food shortages. This is deliberate action, obviously, on behalf of the Netanyahu government. The most significant diplomatic action of the week came with French President Emmanuel Macron saying that France would move to recognise Palestine as a state. And this was also going to be a pressure point for some of the other European nations, such as Britain and Germany. We haven't heard from Keir Starmer or the Germans about whether they're going to follow Macron on this action. But of course, it won't alleviate the problems in Gaza. It's simply a diplomatic pressure point.
People starve while they keep talking or not even talking. It's
Yeah.
disgusting.
I mean, I think that's the extraordinary thing. There does seem to be some movement that Israel has sanctioned some airdrops of
Yeah.
limited aid, but of course, we know that that's a very inefficient way to get food to starving people, Dave.
On Ben's point about France acknowledging the Palestinian state, I think we should acknowledge, given what's happening right now, it does mean fuck all because there are 147 countries that already acknowledge a Palestinian state. Like, bare minimum, we're actually seeing a whole bunch of face saving in the face of, as Ben said, horrific final stages of a genocide that has been obvious for 2 years now. We are seeing the journalists that didn't speak up, they're starting to. Piers Morgan's trying to save a bit of reputation. And I think we're seeing that with certain Western governments as well.
Look, I think
I,
that's
I,
true, but
I,
sorry, Cheryl, I'll
I was
just
just
say
going to
this
say, but I think he's the first of the
the G7.
G7, so meant to be more important if you care about those things, but probably in a position to make more of a fuss about it at the United Nations. I don't know. I mean, I can't abide the hypocrisy of Keir Starmer at the moment, international law lawyer,
Yeah.
and look at him. Look what he's doing. Look what he's saying. And I also think that yes, it's okay. Israel's going, oh, yes, we'll let a few airdrops in. But how do we get to the point where an occupier is in charge of when people can get access to aid? And not only that, the aid is privatized in the
Yeah.
hands of the US.
Yeah.
How did we allow that to happen? I find that absolutely outrageous.
It's almost a perfect metaphor, though, for the meta struggle that's happening here. We're kind of here because American companies make squillions of dollars when
Yeah.
they pilfer the Middle East, and there's just what? So you get an American company now to distribute the aid to
Yeah.
facilitate the enrichment of other American companies ultimately down the line. If this isn't mask off capitalism, I don't know what is.
Well, it's
Mm.
a pretty painful way for Palestinians to have to demonstrate it, isn't it? But
It is.
yes.
It's too
Yeah,
much.
look, I mean, it absolutely is. And I think, I mean, last time there was airdrops delivering aid, there are people actually killed by the falling
Yeah.
containers. I mean, it is a ridiculously inefficient way of getting aid in. Of
The other
course,
thing I should add to this conversation is that on October 8th, 2023, Israel said they were going to shut off electricity, gas, and food. They said that on October 8th, 2023. It's a genocidal plan, and we've watched it unfold. I
Mm.
don't think we should. This isn't a new line that's been crossed. They're just further along the same path they've been on, clearly.
Yeah. So Australia this week did join the 26 other nations, I think it was, or 28, sorry, of more kind of
Words.
wailing and yes, plaintive words going into the ether. And that was before Macron's announcement. It was interesting, though, with the opening of Parliament and Marine Faruqi's lone protest with her sign calling for sanctions against Israel in the face of the famine. Um, there was distress that was talked about. There were all of those sorts of things. But with the email that then the government sent out backgrounding against Faruqi, it was perhaps where their real position came out, which is Australia can't do anything. I mean, that seems to be the fundamental position. We can we can escalate our rhetoric a little bit, but there's actually nothing that we can do, which actually really isn't true as a moral nation ostensibly playing on the international stage. There's quite a few other things that we could do, not the least of which is implement government policy to recognise the Palestinian state. But there are other things that can be done, including the sanctions that Marine Faruqi called for. Why is it, Ben, do you think that there is such inaction still on behalf of the Australian government, actually even now lagging behind some of the Europeans?
Well, they don't want to. They don't want to take action, and that's very clear. There's a range of options that are available to the government if they wanted to. They could call in the ambassador, they could sever diplomatic relations, they could impose sanctions. The Hawke government in the 1980s was pretty strong on imposing sanctions on the apartheid regime. So Labor governments can do these kind of things if they have the courage, but I think it is an issue of political will. They don't want to be out there being accused of being anti-Semitic, and I think they're still tremendously in the sway of certain lobby groups, as we've seen with the recent release of the anti-Semitism statement by the envoy. So the government's content to put out a few statements. I saw Albanese put out a fairly lukewarm prime ministerial statement, but no, the rubber's not hitting the road here.
It was a very all lives matter statement, really.
Yeah.
He did actually both sides it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that Crikey belled it this week when they pointed to a backgrounder that Labor staffers sent out after the Senate, after Marine Faruqi, saying that the election result vindicated Labor's hands-off approach. I think that's a gross misreading, but it's also a cynical risk calculation that they can get away with doing this, and then they don't antagonize their Zionist lobbyists. And more than that, they don't upset the United States in the middle of this ongoing AUKUS performative uh, demonstrations that are going on with treaty signing this week and more money
Yeah.
being paid. So uh, it's calculated. But the point is, we live in an interconnected world now, and
Exactly.
we might be a long way away. But when I was showing my granddaughter, she was asking me, she's only 8, but she was asking me to explain it. When I was showing her where Israel was and Palestine, it's not that far away, really, when you've got a voice to speak up. And we have chosen not to speak up. And I have never been so shocked at the foreign minister's weakness and
Mm,
loss of respect in my political
mm.
lifetime, that she's chosen this approach, to go along with this approach. Is just shocking to me. I find it really hard to
Mm,
believe when all of the Labor elders are pointing out the reality of Labor's platform and what can be done, not to take their advice.
mm.
Among some of the best governments we've had, I'm talking about Hawke and Evans and co. It's it is truly shocking to me that she could be so silent.
And it's kind of insane that there's this ongoing commitment to only looking at the issue of recognizing a Palestinian state after a ceasefire.
Yes,
Um, and now you've got Trump coming out and saying, well, we think we'll just stand back and let Israel finish the job. Um, and even as Macron comes out and commits France to recognizing Palestine, you have the Knesset passing statements
yes.
saying that we're going to annex the West Bank. And without the West Bank, the viability of a Palestinian state would have to be called into question. So there's just contradictions and hypocrisy abounding across the West.
But there's also the horrible recognition that all the artifices that we've erected for ourselves really failing us.
Mm.
We
Hmm.
spent all these years going, oh, we've got an international court of justice. Oh, these people will turn up at The Hague. I don't have any confidence any of that's going to happen.
No.
No.
So,
Well, I mean, there was a time once where Australia, as a middle power, committed to things like international human rights and the United Nations, processes for balancing great power conflict. That seems to have all gone by the wayside under the Albanese government. I think Cheryl's right to point to the weakness of Penny Wong. I mean, this has been a historic sellout, really, of some of the ideas that were once part of Labor's, still are part of Labor's platform. And,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of Labor members in the base feel horrified about what's going on here. I think the government's way out of line, actually, with public opinion. I think ordinary
It is.
people are horrified at what's going on. They can see on their phones every day. And they want the government to take action.
and you,
I can't make up my mind about that because I hear a few people say to me, but what can we do? That line, it's awful. I can't look at it, they say, but what can we do? That line that they keep trotting out, we're too far away. It's not our immediate vicinity and war. But it does overlook the internationalization of the world. And even if we are too far away, our moral culpability in not speaking up. We have a voice. Spain has a voice. Ireland's a little country. It
Yeah.
has a voice.
yeah,
It
You
uses
reckon,
that voice.
Cheryl, is that the evil that is perpetuating this doesn't think that it's too far away to get involved? It's lobbying locally. It's
Mhm.
d- our entire media ecosystem has become Hasbaric bullshit for 2 years. That's not local people doing nothing about this. They are actively getting involved to support the genocide. So if you feel opposite, you know, do the same thing, get involved. Like
but
this
and
idea
there,
that
are-
you can't do
but there
anything is
are
like,
things that we can do. We can stop our military cooperation through Elbit systems. We can introduce economic sanctions. We can go to the UN and demand multilateral targeted sanctions against Israel and particular individuals who are responsible for war crimes. And indeed, we can recognise Palestine as a state, just as France has done. But we've done none of these things
And
at
that's
this
the point.
stage.
We've done none of it.
Yeah.
I wonder
we
if
can also
those,
try
is
to
it
move the
108 Labor branches that have now
Well, this is
called
the thing,
for
there is
action?
real movement in the branches, and of course, Ed Husic continues now to talk out, so to speak out, but,
But they don't have their conference for months. And what's going to happen? What's going to happen in the meantime to all those starving children and adults? It's just,
I mean, we know what's going to happen. This is the thing. They have a 51 seat majority. They're behaving like they want to behave.
Yeah. I think
well,
that's true. The other international story this week relates to the International Court of Justice, and following on from our conversation last week about the sad loss in the federal court here of the Torres Strait Islander elders demanding a duty of care from our government, which alas did not get up in the federal court. There was a great planetary-sized win that I think we can take some solace in at the ICJ, that was taken by, again, young people were the ones who had initiated the litigation, some Pacific Islanders, particularly in Vanuatu, who asked the ICJ to provide a framework for what kind of duties are owed, what responsibilities do nations have to address climate change? And they were successful. It was a really just a thumping victory for them. The ICJ issued a clear and unanimous decision that countries have a legal obligation to protect the climate from greenhouse gas emissions, that failing to do so is a wrongful act that could mean that polluting nations have to pay reparations to countries harmed by climate change. A really clear victory, particularly for the Pacific nations, who campaigned for this case to be heard at the highest court and were represented by our own Jen Robinson. So, Ben, that is pretty thumping, comprehensive victory that obviously isn't binding on nations, but does provide now a kind of a moral and jurisprudential kind of impetus for action.
It's a wake-up call for Australia, and in particular for Murray Watt, the Federal Environment Minister. Look, Australia's been exporting fossil fuels now very enthusiastically for a very long time. The government continues with this fiction that because we export our pollution overseas, that somehow it doesn't matter for our own emissions targets. Everybody knows that's a lie. It's increasingly going to be more and more difficult, I think, for governments to pretend that greenlighting new fossil fuel projects is in any way feasible, moral, ethical, in any way good either for ourselves or our neighbours. You know, this stuff can be stopped. Governments just need to actually do it. That's not to say it'll be easy taking on the fossil fuel lobby, but there's no doubt that the legal structures are in place. So, you know, the so-called safeguard mechanism, which is really a mechanism to safeguard fossil fuel profits, that could be tweaked to actually crack down on all of these new projects that are being greenlit. So once again, it's an issue of political will, isn't it?
I mean, the court said a clean, healthy, and stable environment is a human right. And as Ben said, fossil fuels were specifically singled out as being the main source of the problem, so that the ongoing granting of fossil fuel exploration licenses and fossil fuel subsidies may constitute internationally wrongful acts.
Is there a problem here where if we link this discussion with the last one we've had, where we've basically seen the entire world just go, there is no international law, fuck that nerdy shit. What credence do we give this now that Western countries are going to listen and do what they should?
Cheryl.
Well, I mean, maybe the recent Torres Strait case could be appealed and we could test it. We could.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will
that would be worth doing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think it gives us greater leverage to say, stop gaslighting us by talking about the transition to renewables, when the fact of the matter is that the emissions we create when our fossil fuels are burned overseas is double our domestic emissions. And I think we need to start talking about this. Gives us greater permission and opportunity, I think, to talk about those things. And also, I thought it was interesting that Australia's arguments were completely rejected.
Yeah.
Just utterly rejected. We do actually have the duty of care for what goes on beyond our borders. And
Look,
I'm with Dave, though. I do worry about what those who wish to ignore it are going to say. It's only advisory. Too bad, but test it in the courts while the courts still work.
Well, look, I think that's the case. And, Isabel from the Grata Fund last week was
Last
saying,
week.
that, there clearly is an appeal that
Yep.
is on track potentially of the Torres Strait. And having this ICJ judgment kind of lob in between, I think can only be helpful. And there were like over 100 countries that argued in the ICJ, most of them actually trying to justify their
Yes.
ongoing commitment to fossil fuels, and they were all just rejected.
Yeah.
And so for Australia to be trying to be with a good neighbour, we're part of the Pacific family, as they were actively arguing against nations who couldn't demonstrate, as the Torres Strait Islanders could in the federal court, not just that this is going to happen, but this is happening to them now. They are already experiencing inundation and thus loss of livelihoods and culture, all of which can now be acted upon.
And Woodside's going to add millions of tonnes for years to come. And that's, so you can't just rely on Paris Agreement anymore. I mean, I just think this does bring this into sharp focus. It's come at a good time. How optimistic we can be about its impact, I don't know. But I'm glad it's been said, because it's something that's given people hope to keep going with this fight.
Absolutely. And what it also said is that just complying with Paris and international agreements such as Paris is not enough. You need to be doing everything that you can.
Yeah.
And if you do not, you may be sued by other nations.
I wonder if anyone will ask a question about this in question time. It's hardly
Well,
anybody
we
here.
shall see, because that does lead us
It
to.
won't be the coalition, will it?
It will not. Well, they will not be the coalition. I mean, it was the first week of the 48th Parliament this week, and it really did demonstrate very starkly and visibly the changed positions of the two major parties, in particular, with the just diminution of the numbers of the coalition really incontrovertibly visibly revealed. They're sort of crouching in the corner as Labour
Yes.
is spilling over all around. So look, you can understand there was a bit of a kind of victory lap moment happening for the government, and they did rather rub both the coalition and the Greens' noses in it with the allocation on the scheduling of the inaugural speeches with both Ailey France and Sarah Whitty, who of course took the seat of Melbourne from Adam Bant, getting to do the first honours. It was a pretty good first speech, though, from Ailey, I thought. Cheryl, in your old seat.
Yes. Yeah. What a different member for Dixon. Oh, gosh, what the contrast with Peter Dutton. Dixon people won't know. They won't know what's happened. I admire the way she kept going. Not many people get up and do it 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
But secondly, given her life's experience with the loss of her son, well, the fact of her car accident and the loss of her leg to start with, such resilience, but such highlighting of empathy and kindness in her life is so far removed from what Peter Dutton offered that I'm just really happy for the people of Dixon, and I really hope they appreciate it by returning her. For many elections ahead. I think she'll be she used to be a journalist, didn't she? I think she'll be a very grassroots, empathetic member for people who need to go to their local member for help. I think she'll be great. And her speech was wonderful.
It was
the Liberals
wonderful.
did the same things when Peter Dutton beat me, by the way. It's what they've done with highlighting their so-called giant slayers by giving them the first speeches. It's a bit of a ritual there, but they were both very good. I mean, I think Sarah Whitty, who replaced Adam Bant, she was very good too. Her life experience. I saw Peter Harcher say yesterday that it's all well and good to have these wonderful life stories, but nobody spoke about the economy until the new member for Forest, I think it was in WA, a Liberal, spoke.
Oh,
I thought,
God. It
oh,
doesn't,
isn't that everything that's wrong with political commentary at the moment?
it
That
really,
nothing you say matters unless you mention the economy.
the
His point was
economy,
that you
well,
can't have all these social justice things unless you've got a strong economy. I want to know first that I've got real human beings with
mm,
human values
I
that
want to
put
know that.
people first.
I want to know that too, Cheryl. But increasingly in this parliament, with 51-seat majority, I'm not sure it matters whether they're real humans inside the Labor Party, because the Labor Party's systems are about solidarity, not morality.
Yeah, and
They
that's
say this
why.
openly.
Well, that's
So
why I haven't. That's
I
why
feel
nobody's spoken up on Gaza
no,
except Ed, because he's
it-
not a newbie. He's been in cabinet. He has
exactly.
the right to speak up. But when is anybody else going to speak up? I
No,
don't have much expectation.
I'm just saying that yes, these might be wonderful people, and I think they are. They sound like good people.
It's a good
But,
start.
but, but
It's a
it
better
is a good
start than a
start.
bot.
I don't want to be too negative, but is it just more people saying flowery things and unable to do stuff?
Oh no, first speeches, inaugural speeches are different from towing the party line on policy discussions. They're
I'm
very different.
I'm
yeah,
not saying they're
But
not,
they
but I'm
will
saying
toe the line.
from
But
here
they
on, what
will toe the
happened?
line. You're right. They
and
will
if they
toe the
don't,
line.
they'll end up like Fatima Payman potentially. But
Exactly.
it was interesting, Ben, wasn't it? Because Ailey France, in particular, when she talked about being the giant killer, it was the first time I think we'd heard Peter Dutton's name for like a few months.
Wasn't
It
it
was
good?
like the ghost of Christmas past, just having a little revisiting us for a moment, because it is a very changed context in which the coalition returned to Canberra, and Susan Lee certainly got a fight on her hand.
I thought
Yeah, I
what
mean,
was.
I think. Oh, you go, Cheryl.
No, no, go,
No,
Ben.
you go. Sorry, I've had plenty of time.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the new lower house in particular is going to be dominated by Labor. I mean, Labor's got a massive majority and really bestraddles the centre of Australian politics now. The Liberals have been pushed, perhaps they've marginalised themselves to the right, and there's not a lot of opposition on the left. I expect actually that in this parliament, most of the scrutiny and the opposition will emerge on the left from the Teals and the Greens, particularly in the Senate.
Yeah.
You see in big state government elections where Labor wins big, after a while they do get arrogant. They certainly did down here in Victoria. And over the years up in Queensland, I think with the big majorities that Palaszczuk had up there, every government gets lazy and complacent after a while. It's a bad sign for Labor, I think, that they're already running victory laps. The first week back, there's a bunch of big policy problems that confronts the government, not just the ones that Jim Chalmers is talking about with productivity and what have you, but you've got a bunch of social policy issues that they haven't addressed. There's a crisis in our welfare mutual obligation system. The NDIS has big issues. I could go on. There's a bunch of stuff that this government is in charge of now and actually needs to address. So, the victory lap, I think, will be short and people are going to start paying attention to what is the government doing. And I think there'll be a lot of questions start to be asked.
Mm.
It was interesting. The first question in question time from the independent others was from Nicolette Bowler. And I think it was a climate question, if I recall now. Which was just battered away. But so I looked at the allocation of questions because I think it's ridiculous to pretend we've got an equal government and a close to equal opposition.
Mm.
And I was interested to see how Tony Burke allocated the questions. And I saw at least 3 from the independent benches. And I saw, and Andrew Wilkie was one of them. I'd like to know how they're deciding if the government is saying, Wilkie, it's your turn, or if the independents are caucusing and saying, I've got this question today. I'd like to know
I think
more
they do.
about
I think it is. I think they decide amongst themselves who's going to get the crossbench questions, and I think
Well, it was great that Nicolette got the very first question, which I thought was, and she was very powerful.
Well, let's hope
Asking
it's
that
not
question
because
as well.
she needs to get a question in before she's turfed out with the.
On the other hand, Susan Lee's first question shows that they'd learned nothing. It was about why hasn't Trump spoken to you? I mean, these people have learned nothing. Absolutely,
they really have learned nothing. One of the policy agendas immediate priorities of the government was introducing legislation to reduce the HECS debt by 20%, which is something that they took to the election and have made much ballyhoo about. But really, it is a very small part of the tertiary sector problems that are being confronted by our universities. So we're going to go to an interview with Graham Turner, who is an emeritus professor up at, I should have checked, I think it's certainly at Queensland University. And he has just written a book published through Monash University Press in the National Interest Series about the real problems that are facing our universities at every turn, and from every perspective, whether it's institutionally, whether it's from the students' perspective, whether it's from the academics' perspective, the standard of education, diminution of humanities. So we'll get an overview from him, and then we'll come back and have a bit more of a chat about that. Graham Turner, thank you very much for joining us on the Sunday Shot.
You're welcome.
We're going to talk about your great book, Broken, about the problems that the university sector is facing, very fundamental problems. It seemed to me, reading that book, that there are two key and related issues facing the university sector today, and then from that, a number of other fundamental problems flow. And the first being really the commercialisation of the sector, so treating the sector as an industry and universities as corporations that need to respond to market forces, and ignoring the fact that they and you know, education and knowledge that they provide are a public good. How do you think that's come about, and what do you see as the core implications of that?
There are a couple of sort of main influences, I suppose. One is just the kind of general trend of neoliberal policies of privatisation that governments all over the world have used as a way of shifting the cost of services off the national budget and putting them onto private budgets, and also shifting the responsibility for how well they work for the community away from government and back onto the providers. So that's one. The other one that's more specific is really the changes to higher education that occurred in the late 80s with the reforms set up by John Dawkins, which collapsed what used to be a kind of two-part sector and created a whole bunch of universities competing for the same amount of money, and really set in train the idea that universities should start to think about themselves as businesses in order to find ways to fund themselves. So the end in sight really for government was to avoid paying for universities. And so, the amount of money they've paid into universities over that period, since the late 80s is just about halved.
So has the money in real terms halved, or is it just that there are so many more students, so it needs to, the money per student has gone down?
Well, it's both really. Yeah, it's both, because the money per student has gone down. So they expanded the number of students, but they also reduced the amount of money that they paid per student. But also the percentage of the university's income, which had come from government, has halved. So, that it's coming from all kinds of angles in a way that it's making it very, very difficult. And whatever new money was put into the system was introduced competitively, which tended to mean that the group of 8 universities, the old sandstone universities, got most of the money. And, regionals and smaller universities had to be happy with the scraps.
Yeah. And one of the other consequences of trying to kind of commercialise or corporatise the universities is the just extraordinary growth of management and managerialism. And you talk about the way that sort of set up this binary, this competitive binary between management and the academics, with your view being that at the moment, with management winning, as it were, you've got the tail wagging the dog.
One of the things the universities did when there was this change of policy that made them more responsible for finding their own money was they decided that the way to deal with that was to grow. And so even though they were getting less money per student, they were getting more money. And so they just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And what that did was it made it almost impossible for the traditional, relatively collegial forms of governance to operate. And that's where you get the corporate managers being brought in and start to treat it like it's a business, and install management processes and so on that are more familiar within business than they are within the academy. The problem is, universities don't work like businesses. One of the real problems about the relationship between academics and managers is that academics are the only ones who really know what it is that they do and why it would matter. And when you start to introduce people from outside the academy just to run the business, they don't have a clue about what academics are doing. And when you try to explain to them what they're doing, it just goes over their head. All they're interested in is the bottom line. So those are trends that have increasingly fractured the relationship between academics and those who are responsible for governing the institutions in which they work. And now, it's a real problem that a lot of academics would regard their administration as the enemy.
Yeah. Part of the other, and I guess this brings us to the next sort of core issue confronting the academy, is the sort of instrumentalization of it. So government treating the universities as a way of delivering their policy agendas around what their priorities are. And that has particularly seen an undermining of the humanities.
It's now reached something of a crisis, really. There are something like 2,000 jobs that have been lost in the last 12 months out of the humanities. And the really awful thing is that often those jobs are going with the disciplines from which they were drawn. So that not just individuals being cut, but whole disciplines. So these people are not just losing their jobs, they don't have a chance of getting another job because the discipline's gone. So they're actually losing their careers. So we're in a danger of losing a whole bunch of important bodies of knowledge. And the one that's always talked about areas of languages.
Yeah.
And so Indonesian is the one that always comes up because they're our biggest, most important neighbour. And yet the study of Indonesian languages has shrunk. I think there's only 1 or 2 places left in the country now where you can study them. And although some of the universities say, oh, you don't need a language because you've got AI, and you've got translation apps, that's profoundly ignorant. You don't understand another culture with AI or a translation app. And just to say that as a university is just staggering in its misconception of what the values of those knowledges are. So the other thing I'd say is that probably Trump may have done us a favour in attacking the universities in the US, because he's reminded people that there's more to universities than just training engineers or computer sciences, that actually they're part of the foundation blocks of a democratic state. And the knowledges that they present provide the kind of guardrails against exactly what we've been looking at happening in the US. And I think people have kind of remembered why universities are a public good as a result of what Trump's done. So hopefully that memory will linger on.
Because you spoke very eloquently about the kind of, humanities have generated the philosophical basis of our legal system, the principles and rights that underpin our democracy, the literary and artistic heritage that feeds our culture. All of these things are, they're more ephemeral than training to be an engineer, but they're really fundamentally important to our democracy, as you say.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, reinventing the university system as an instrument of government policy, and when that government policy is focused solely on economic interests, has meant that a whole section of what education can do for the population is set aside. And as that's happened, the money has been withdrawn and placed elsewhere. And so those areas have shrunk in ways that are, that's dangerous for the society. So many of the problems that we face today are problems where you need the humanities and social sciences knowledges in order to deal with them. We can't save this world with STEM. We can do certain kinds of things with it, but the kind of understanding of how our society and culture work in the interests of all, that's something that humanities and social sciences tell us how to do.
Because it strikes me that even undermining humanities even fails on its own terms, if you like, if you're focusing on vocational training, because I think you quoted Hannah Forsyth who was saying, we don't know what sorts of skills are going to be needed for the jobs of the future. And actually, many employers lament the fact that critical thinking, high levels of literacy, all of these things are falling away from our graduates at the moment. And they're the very things that they want for jobs-ready graduates.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is a shame that we've moved away from a pattern where you had a kind of broad generalist degree in humanities or social sciences or the sciences, topped off with some kind of professional qualification. That was a model that was around for a long time, and that's gone now. And I really think that that's disabling Australia for the future. That you do need people to have a broad education. You do need them to have a kind of critical level of resilience. And the ability to think critically about the way society is working.
And the Albanese government's response to all of this has been sort of lamentably lacking in a way, because I think we remember when in the Morrison era, the jobs-ready graduate packages were introduced, and there was a lot of criticism, like an overwhelmingly negative reception to that, including from the then opposition, which basically was charging punitively high fees for things like the humanities to try and, send people back towards STEM. But since they've been in government and they've now started their second term, they haven't actually reversed any of those sort of terrible reforms.
No, unfortunately, it's one of the things that the Morrison government did quite well, which was design a package of legislation that was quite difficult to unpack.
Right.
So one of the problems with unpacking it is it means taking money from one section of the university sector and giving it to the other. So the people you're taking it from, of course, are going to squeal and complain that they're losing money. And so it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. No excuse, of course, for not doing it. If the political will was there, as they pretend it is, they would have done it during their first term. I don't see why they didn't do it right away. They're now saying that they may think about it this term, but I'm not confident, because it seems to me that enough vice chancellors are now wedded to that cash coming in to areas that didn't used to make lots of cash, and they're wedded to the way that money works, that they're not going to particularly pressure the government to make changes. So it really has to depend on a much more grassroots movement from within the university, saying, look, you said you were going to get rid of job-ready graduates, you haven't done it, how about you do it now?
And having to rely on this sort of grassroots campaign to change it, I mean, that seems to be putting more pressure again on academics. And you painted a really damning picture of the life of the academic in today's university sector, the very precarity of their existence due to the casualisation of the labour force.
So 50% of the teaching in our universities is done by casual staff. They're usually working at more than one institution at the time. They don't get paid over the summer and over the holidays. They don't get support to do their research. There are no career paths for them in the future, and the number of jobs are shrinking. So why would you want to work as an academic in a system like that? And the answer is, fewer people do.
Why is it that the academic is ignored when it comes to just the terms and conditions of their employment?
Unfortunately, governments don't really like academics, unless they need them. That the knowledge that they produce is not always convenient.
Yeah.
And then you've got the cheerleaders in the media who don't like academics either, because they're competitors for kind of cultural authority. And so it's in their interest to downplay academic knowledges in order to promote their own. So those two main, factors within the system are working against academics being taken seriously and being respected as essential to the society. And so it's pretty tough. I mean, it's one of the things that you hear is just these younger staff members coming into something that they really wanted to do and are idealistic about it, and then they find that they're treated with such little respect that it's actually very dispiriting for them, and that's why they're turning away. You would expect that the people who are most well paid in a university would be maybe the senior professors who are doing the best research, and the senior teachers who are attracting the students. Not true at all. They're getting paid a fraction of what the senior executives are getting paid. And that's why I talk about the tail wagging the dog. It's almost like we're working for them rather than the other way around.
One thing I did just want to touch on before we go is the issue of international students, and how important they've become as a revenue source to the universities, and what that's meant more generally to culture and education standards.
Certainly, people who teach in the universities now tell me that it has got out of hand, that the number of international students in many areas far exceeds the number of domestic students, both at undergraduate and at postgraduate level. That the quality control on the international students coming in isn't ensuring that they have good language skills, so it's not uncommon for them to be using a translation app in class.
Wow.
And it means that things like group work become very difficult because they're simply not able to participate in the same way. So there are real problems with the actual provision of the offerings to international students, and there's serious problems about the degree to which the sector became dependent upon that income as a way to replace or to fill the gaps left by the withdrawal of other sources of government income.
And though it hasn't stopped, despite the fact that it's now this sort of massive export industry, it hasn't stopped the sector being used as a bit of a political football when things got a bit dicey pre-election around housing policy, for example.
Yeah, that's right. There was a bit, there was the idea that international students were primarily responsible for the rental crisis, when it turned out that something like 4% of international students rent, and 4% of the problem was created by international students. So it was nonsense, and it's one of the things where the university, you've got to have sympathy for them, that they kept getting pushed by changes in government policy. First they tell them they have to have international students, then they tell them they can't have them, and then they tell them because they are having them, we now have a rental crisis. So like you say, they use it as a political football, and probably the mistake that universities made long ago was responding so well to pressures from government. They should have fought back, and they didn't. And I think we're seeing the consequences of that they're now lost an awful lot of power, and fighting back seems like an impossible thing for them to do.
So, Ben, we've got students who are broke and who are, subject to the sort of meanness of our social security system when it comes to income support. We've got academics who are broke and who are really living very precarious existence in entirely casualised positions and careers. You've got education standards which are falling, campus life no longer that kind of broad, confabulous social existence that I certainly recall from my university days. But you've got senior management getting incredibly rich and sharing a lot of the university's wealth with private consultants. It's not a great picture that Graham paints.
Yeah, I think it's an accurate diagnosis, unfortunately, and it's an excellent book from Graham and a timely intervention into the higher education policy debate in Australia. I teach a whole unit full of international students, and I can confirm that a lot of them don't have conversational English. I don't set group work for them. I set individual assignments. The use of AI and ChatGPT is rife amongst the student population. They're not learning how to write essays properly. They're just going to the robots. At my own university, Monash University, the largest university by enrolment, there's been more than $17.5 million of wage theft from academics. So the university has just not paid people for the teaching that they've done. The union just took them to the federal court and won a big case, actually, where Justice Snowden in the Federal Court of Australia found that the university had broken the Fair Work Act by not paying teachers for turning up to student consultations. It's a massive case. It goes back 10 years. It affects thousands of teachers. And the people implementing all of these policies are doing very well, thank you. Vice chancellors are making more than $1 million a year each. And there's this whole class of kind of academic executives that Graham talks about. Your pro-vice chancellors, your deputy vice chancellors, your vice presidents for X, Y, and Z. They're all on $500,000 each as well. So it's an incredibly well remunerated executive class. And I think what's happened actually is that they've kind of captured these institutions. They're meant to be public institutions, but because the boards of these universities are now run by corporate figures, largely people from business, in my own university from the mining sector in many cases. So they're quite happy with an executive class that's paid very well because that's what they see from business. And so that they really have no problems with the corporatisation of the modern university. So it's a big problem. As Graham mentions, the job ready graduates policy by the Morrison government has been a disaster, but there isn't a lot of pushback from the vice chancellors, because one of the things that job ready graduates did was actually increase the amount of money that students paid into the system. So students are now paying more money into universities than the government itself is paying in terms of public funding. It's an increasingly big problem for students because they're graduating with these massive education debts. And the policy this week that the Albanese government introduced into Parliament to cut graduate debts by 20%, well, that'll be good for some people, but it won't really touch the sides of the bigger problem here, which is that the fees that students are being charged are now very, very high. You're talking about $50,000 for a 3-year arts degree. It's a huge amount of student debt that graduates are taking on at a very important time of their life. And it's really affecting not just their quality of life, but indeed their ability to start families, save for potentially for a mortgage, pay the rent. It's a big problem.
I was surprisingly, after post politics and after a little stint at Oxford University, I was at UNSW, Director of Teaching and Learning, for about 8 years. And we had to set group work. It was just built into the courses I was teaching. And I encountered exactly what you have, Ben. The non-English proficiency of international students and the effect it had on the rest of the group in group tasks. But beyond that, I did experience that managerialism. I went from full-time to part-time by choice and became subject to individual contract, and still had to issue contracts to other workers who were co-teaching. And I saw all that up close. And it's not about their skills, it's about the penny pinching that they can get away with in every course. And to see the universities have adopted that managerialism, in my view, with great enthusiasm. And it's filtered down into decision making, like what's happening at the ANU, where they can't see the point of having a national dictionary centre or a national centre for biography, because where's the value in that?
Where's the revenue coming from there?
Yeah. So
Sorry,
it permeates everything. And I agree with Graham in your interview. It's just another tentacle of the neoliberalism that's infected us for decades now.
Absolutely.
And how we're going to get out of this, I'm just not sure. Can I say one more thing? Michelle Arrow, who is president of the Australian History Association at the moment, is organising a letter expressing their profound disappointment at Labor's, well, I don't know whether it's unwillingness, but the fact that they haven't repealed job-ready graduates, but also pointing out that the arts and humanities are the ones that attract a lot of rural students and female and Indigenous students. And they are being deprived of the opportunity to study and develop robust critical thinking and all the other things that Ben pointed to and Graham pointed to earlier.
Dave.
Joe, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Cheryl. I also think the way we frame these discussions, we need to stop talking about neoliberalism as though it's this sort of series of accidents and not a very deliberate decision to engineer society in a certain way.
Absolutely deliberate.
Just let me finish, please. So there was a good comment in the thread that was, I agree, Cheryl, that said, it was from Tim, that said, feudalists prefer their peasants stupid. And I do think this is the overarching theme here, because we're going to have 20% hex debt reduction in our degrees, but if you write about Palestine, it might be a hate crime. I mean, that seems absurd.
Yeah. And I think the other thing which Graham alludes to in the book is that by having a kind of a corporatist, profit-driven agenda in the tertiary sector, it means that as he said, whole sections of knowledge that attract less students but are vital to have within our culture, within our society, even within our economy, are being
Yeah.
lost. He mentioned Indonesian languages, but there's also things like psychology graduates, because they don't drive as much profit. So less universities are now offering them. And so now when we're here in a mental health crisis, we don't have enough graduates coming out of psychology departments. There aren't even as many psychology departments as there used to be. So the government actually had to make a strategic intervention belatedly to try and ensure that there wasn't this gap between the professionals that we need and what universities in a profit-driven environment are churning out. I mean, that loss of knowledge and expertise, Ben, I think would have to be one of the most stark and scarifying things that's happening.
At Macquarie University at the moment, they're getting rid of essentially their entire sociology department.
Yeah.
There's massive disciplinary issues at ANU now, where there's big cuts to history and other humanities disciplines. This does go over into the STEM disciplines, you're right, as well there, because you're right, the universities are just chasing the dollar now. And the real losers, I think, unfortunately, apart from ordinary citizens, are students in regional and smaller university campuses, places like Ballarat with Federation Uni, Charles Sturt in New South Wales. Right, these institutions are really struggling. They're actually really having trouble getting, making enough to make ends meet, really. Meanwhile, the very large GO8 institutions are minting dollars in from international students like the ones I teach. So the tremendous imbalances within the system. Some of this was picked up by the Universities Accord that Jason Clare commissioned in his first term, but none of that stuff's been acted upon, by the way. I mean, they put out the report and it's just gathering dust on the shelf. So there's a big problem here, and it's bigger than just can you get a decent, affordable education in this country. It does go to the heart of Australia as a democratic nation.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the things that the Accord said about the jobs ready kind of graduate, was that by maintaining that system, which the Morrison government had brought in, it is ensuring that in the future our universities will not be fit for purpose at all. And they said that the Accord came out about 2 years ago, I think, Ben, and then nothing has been done. And at the moment, there doesn't really seem to be much momentum to do more. This 20% reduction in HECS was being presented more as the solution to a problem rather than a tiny first step in a sector that needs major overhaul.
The Senate has got a governance inquiry to universities that we hope will come back in the new term. And I think there'll be a lot of questions that need to be asked of university chancellors and vice chancellors in that inquiry.
And some of what that is attempting to do is to get an independent commission set up that could be more strategic about the sector as a whole, and perhaps try and avoid the homogenisation of university offerings, so that everybody wants a law school and everyone wants a medical school, because you can drive profit out of those degrees and they're very popular. But that leads to kind of lack in offering. And again, it reduces in some ways the competitiveness, as you say, of those regional universities, because they're never going to be able to compete for the status of the sandstones around those, pillar degrees, if you like.
You often don't notice this stuff until it's gone or when you need it. So look at what's happening in South Australia at the moment with the algal bloom, right? That's a massive environmental disaster. There's a clear need for better science there in marine biology, right? What's happening there? What's causing it? The government has, I think, announced a small amount of research into that. But marine biology is exactly one of those disciplines that doesn't make a lot of money for universities, is expensive to teach, and which it's one of those sort of non-glamorous disciplines that universities have been cutting back on.
Yeah. Well, look, it's like yet another area of public policy where there's a lot of intervention and really clever strategic thought that is required. A lot of it some of that strategic thinking has already been done and is in these reports, but it's whether the government is going to have the will to make these things a priority.
And that's the problem with having 94 seats.
Yeah.
As Dave's been saying, I think the urgency to respond can be sidelined.
Yeah, and they can claim vindication from the election result
Yep.
of their,
Yeah, I mean, they've
incremental
really
approach.
I really think they're going to willingly misinterpret
Mhm.
that election result. I mean, most people just did not want Peter Dutton. They're
Yeah.
absolutely terrified.
Yep.
And a lot of people who didn't expect to be elected were elected. Whether they're one-termers or not is immaterial, because in one way, because there's such a buffer
Yeah.
against the opposition numbers.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of opportunity for Labor to take its time and choose its priorities, which it wouldn't have had if there was a more pressing opposition in
Well,
place.
no, and sorry, Dave, go.
I wrote about centrism as a doctrine this week, and
Yeah.
what it essentially is today is just a data-driven electoral path of least resistance. Morally, doesn't matter, but it is just what is the easiest path through the gooey center of Australian politics. And in that scenario, it turns us into monsters that let Holocausts happen and universities disappear. And, I
But
don't have much
weirdly, it's
further.
kind of being replicated at the senior levels of universities as well, with
Yes.
this now reliance on the advice from unbelievably well-paid consultants. I mean, if you think the vice chancellors are doing well, the consultants are doing a lot better, and you're seeing scandals coming through in the ANU and UTS. A whole range of different universities who are relying on basically advice from consultants to say cut courses. Look at the bottom line only. And it was, I think, reported in SMH this morning that for all of the first term Albanese government's commitments to reducing consultant spending, expenditure is actually going back up in these areas for the Big Four and beyond.
PwC is back in favour, I hear.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
I mean, it's just astonishing.
I just saw a breaking news. Can I interrupt?
Please.
Oh, well, Anthony Albanese has gone one step further. He has said, apparently on Insiders, that Israel is quite clearly breaching international law by withholding aid from civilians in Gaza, but that the government will not recognise a Palestinian state imminently. So there we have it.
So nothing happened. Okay.
So status quo.
So what was this extra action they were going to take if
They're using a bigger font
Israel
in their letters.
didn't react?
Yeah, that's it. It is. It's
What
bigger.
was it? That's it. Oh, more
It's
words.
more thoughts and prayers. It's a terrible
Concern trolling.
Yeah. Well, look, we have come to the end of another show already, unbelievably. But as is our wont, we would give everyone the opportunity to give a top tip, either from what you've seen in the last week that was, or that you've got your eye on coming up in the week ahead. Cheryl, any top tips from you?
May I have two?
Please.
My first one is that Albanese is going to keep trying to sideline the Greens and work with the coalition, and that'll be one interpretation of his so-called mandate. And I don't think he cares if we get things like a compromised NAC, because he is hell-bent and seems strategically vindicated in his own mind that his approach to the Greens paid off electorally. So I think he's going to choose to go with the coalition where he can. And I think that will be appalling outcomes in legislation. But my second thing is a little word of hope. I am so excited for Jeremy Corbyn and Zara. What's her name? Sultana. What's her first name? Zara, is it?
Oh, I don't know this.
Zara.
Yes, I'm so excited for them, because every time I look on Twitter, they've got another 100,000 new members. Last night, they were up to 500,000. The kind of disruptive innovation that's going to bring to a failing political system in the UK, I think is really exciting.
Oh, that is exciting.
500,000. I mean, Australian political parties would eat their heart out for
They
that.
would dream of such
And
things.
I don't know what the average membership of the Tories and the Labor Party, but I don't think it's 500,000.
No, it would not. And it's probably sadly dwarfed at the moment by reform as well. So
Yeah,
if we can get
yeah,
some kind of
yeah.
countervailing force there,
So
that would
this
be
is a good
fantastic.
countervailer because
Yeah.
the right-wing press in the UK are, just like they have here in Australia, championing Farage in the way that we championed right-wing heroes out here for a while. So 500,000, that's a really good critical mass.
That is certainly something to keep an eye on, and an optimistic eye.
Yes,
Ben,
little hope.
Ben.
Well, I was also going to mention the new party from Corbyn and Sultana. Actually, I think it's very important for British politics. Perhaps I'll just take a couple of steps back to point out that one of the reasons this is happening is because of how disastrous Keir Starmer's first year in office has been. If you look at the polls, I mean, Labor's polling in the 20s there after winning a landslide, let's remember. So, and that's really been because I think Starmer hasn't really appeared to know what he stands for. You know, there's been a tremendous amount of policy uncertainty there. Labor seems to have walked back a lot of its core principles and policies, including about welfare policies, and there's been some controversial decisions around some of their budget, some of the things that Rachel Reeves has done. And I think this has contributed to a collapse in support for British Labor under Starmer. And that's what's driving this new Corbyn Sultana party from the left. So I think it's a warning for federal Labor here under Albanese that centrism has its own perils. And that it's not necessarily the case that just because you're sitting in the middle of politics in terms of the spectrum, if you like, that you'll be able to dominate politics in terms of what people support.
And
All
also,
that landslides last.
well, and also that
Exactly.
to that point, Cheryl, that misinterpreting a vote against something as a vote for you, and a whole endorsement of your agenda can be dangerous. Dave.
Yeah, I'll do two as well because
Because we can.
It's the precedent we've set. There's no international law now.
Sorry.
I'm excited about Jeremy Corbyn's party as well. I think they'd be very wise not to allow anyone remotely associated with the establishment of the UK Labour Party anywhere near their decision-making process whatsoever. I think that'd be absolutely crazy. If you're going to the Palestine rally today, Free Palestine, NAM is urging people to follow the lead of UK activists and bring some pots and pans and some wooden spoons and get really noisy. So yeah, do that. 3, rest in peace, Ozzy Osbourne.
Yes, indeed. I thought of you when the news of Ozzy Osbourne's death came through. Picking up on something Cheryl was just saying about, Anthony Albanese not minding too much about a compromise. We saw today, just like the fact that expenditure on consultants is going up. The transparency of this government is actually worse than the dying days of the Morrison government when it comes to responding to freedom of information and information that they are withholding. So, there's a lot that we hoped was going to be transformed by an incoming Labor government that has not been. I will also just, the complete conflict of interest, and my second top tip is that playing at Carriage Works now is Trophy Boys, a fantastic play about misogyny, toxic masculinity, and debating, which I can highly recommend, 5 stars all round. And if you're in Perth, don't miss The Gospel According to Paul, starring Jonathan Biggins, about the political legacy of Paul Keating. Both of them will sell out, so get in early. Thank you very much for joining us on today's Sunday Shot. Please, if you can, throw a few dollars our way. We've crunched some numbers and we're not flush with cash, let's put it that way. But if you can't give, we'd love you to like and subscribe our channel so the algorithms smile upon us. We look forward to seeing you next week on the Sunday Shot. Thanks very much to Ben and Cheryl for being such fabulous guests today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, guys.